There's something of a minor mystery in Bible studies. It's the kind of thing that a lot of us just skip over, but for some people it really bothers them. The question is simple to state, but can lead someone down a rabbit hole of potential interpretations and explanations if the student isn't careful. The question is, why would God place the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden? It kind of feels like God could have just put the tree outside the garden, and then everything would have been fine. I mean, isn't that kind of what any responsible parent does when we don't want a toddler getting into the cookie jar before dinner? Don't we put it on a higher shelf? There are lots of explanations that try to answer this, and I'm not going to even attempt to mention all of them. One thing that is worth pointing out, though, is that the first 3 chapters of Genesis are full of rhymes, wordplays, and double entendre in Hebrew. When you add in the literary structure of the creation narrative, it's a little less clear that what we have is a straightforward dictation of events. It might be a pure myth, it might be a riff on other ancient Near East creation stories, it might be a polemic against other theological systems, it might be an inspired compression of events, and it might be any combination of these things or many others which will make some details inscrutable. Gilgamesh was said to have sought out an ancient tree of immortality, and if this was the author's way of telling his audience not to do that particular kind of treasure hunting, then some of the elements he was picking up on might have been more important than resolving the plot point of why God put the tree there. We could interrogate a lot of beloved stories the same way. Why was Goldilocks walking in the woods? Why was Red Riding Hood so eager to spill the beans to a guy named the Big Bad Wolf? Why did John F. Kennedy's security detail allow him to drive with his car uncovered? Sometimes, it's not lazy writing, it's just more work to fill in the plot hole than it's worth. When we probe these plot holes, though, sometimes we find valuable insights. Maybe the 3 bears were squatters on the land of Goldilocks' rich parents. Maybe Red Riding Hood was friendly with all animals. Maybe the presidential security needed to be reviewed. It's important to not put too much stock in these maybes. To whatever extent, and in whatever way the primary text is true, every maybe that we add to it can only have half the likelihood of being true unless there's something outside the text to increase that probability. I think too many of us will get a maybe stuck in our head, and when no one can prove it wrong, we take that as a sign that it must be true. At best, we can establish that it might be true. Despite that, there are at least 3 reasons why these kinds of examinations are worthwhile. First, they keep us flexible. It's hard to get too dogmatic about what a text means if we get new, equally legitimate explanations all the time. Second, it reminds us to keep our eyes open. The text always has more to say to us that's never been seen before. And of course, third, because it's fun. Anyone with a view that's never been seen before should be treated cautiously. Time will tell if they're introducing something useful or not. At the same time, even if it's not useful, it's still exercise for our brains. I have a number of takes where I stand alone. Some of them are fairly serious, like thinking that Matthew was written in Hebrew. Others are more lighthearted, like this one I'm writing today. I was thinking about all of the oddities in the story of the first temptation the other day. There are a number of them. The fact that God put the tree in the garden is the start. There's also the fact that the snake is allowed in the garden, that the snake talks, that Adam and Eve don't die immediately after eating the fruit, and on and on. Some people have speculated that Adam and Eve were intended to eat the fruit, but they did so too soon. Others have speculated that the fruit was food for the snake. What if the fruit was meant for the woman, though? Consider, Eve was never told that the fruit would kill her, only Adam was. In fact, Eve is explicitly told by the snake that she will not die. Then, when Eve does in fact eat of the fruit, nothing happens. It isn't until Adam is enticed to eat that Adam and Eve start to suffer any consequences. Look for yourself. In Genesis 3 verse 7, Eve eats, and then nothing happens. Then the verse ends with her sharing with her husband, and he eats, and then in verse 8 their eyes are opened. What would be the implications if this were true? What if the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil were intended for women? It's notable that there were two trees at the center of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of eternal life. One rather obvious idea is that men could be intended for the fruit of eternal life, while women were intended for the knowledge of good and evil. This kind of turns the idea of male headship on its head. In a world where men live forever, but women knew stuff, it would make more sense for women to be in charge. This is, in some ways, more in line with the Hebrew word applied to woman in Genesis 2 verse 18, Ezer. This word is generally applied to those who help from above rather than below. Think benefactor rather than employee. It is applied to God in Exodus 18 verse 4, Deuteronomy 33 verse 7, Deuteronomy 33 verse 26, Deuteronomy 33 verse 29, Psalm 33 verse 20, Psalm 70 verse 5, Psalm 115 verse 9, Psalm 115 verses 10 to 11, Psalm 124 verse 8, Psalm 146 verse 5, and Hosea 13 verse 9, and a rescue from danger in Psalm 20 verse 2, Psalm 89 verse 19, Psalm 121 verse 1, Psalm 121 verse 2, Ezekiel 12:14. Isaiah 30 verse 5 specifically say that a people is not an Ezer unless they can provide more help than the one seeking help has access to themselves. That also explains why Eve is told that she will become like God when she eats the fruit. I'm building a lot out of a little to presume that women didn't get the fruit of eternal life though. The fact that no one mentions women being forbidden and that they were partaking of all the fruit of the trees does at least imply that Adam and Eve were both eating the fruit of eternal life already until they were expelled from the garden. This has implications as well. If constant eating of the fruit of eternal life was required to maintain our immortality, maybe the same is true of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Maybe soon after being expelled from the garden, they lost the depth of their divine knowledge. If both men and women were intended to be immortal, and the prohibition was to men and not women, what would that mean? It would imply that not everything the fruit revealed to the first couple was entirely true. After all, in Genesis 3 verse 13, Eve tells God that the snake tricked her into eating, not into sharing. Here, though, more is seen. Eve does not get her personal name until Genesis 3 verse 20. Perhaps what we learn is that for Eve, the fruit was an option, but only if she gave up part of her identity as human. God most often works through people, and it's possible that God set up the fruit so that when humanity needed divine wisdom, we could access it through the fruit. Given time, as humanity learned to do so carefully and wisely, God would guide them to use the fruit and give up their humanity in moments of necessity. This implies that it would be the women taking these tastes of divinity. This does make a certain kind of sense of what we see. When we look at the world missions that have helped the poor and guided humanity, they are overwhelmingly founded or started by women. Mother Teresa, Saint Cabrini, and Bessie Kaiser are the first names that come to mind for me. Despite the emphasis on male lines in the Old Testament and a few lines about women and authority in the New Testament, this paints a picture where the input of women needs to be considered and given weight. This thought can be strengthened by Deborah's judgeship in Judges 4, and the daughters of Zelophehad at the end of Numbers 26. Naomi and Ruth demonstrate this kind of crafty wisdom in the book of Ruth. Esther directs events of state favorably against the political intrigue of men. I think this idea could be taken too far, just like any other idea. As far as I know, I'm the first one to think about these things in this particular way. As such, it should be given a heavy helping of salt. Certainly it should not be preferred to other observations with longer and stronger support. However, these are some of the things that I noticed, and I think they are worth a little thought in our spare time. What do you think follows from this kind of thought?